business magnate, confidently crushing competitors and creating something that has outlived its time. Sparkling oil pipes and many strategic deals are all bright elements of the life of a man whose deeds have led to the creation of something more than it seems at first glance. In an era when raw materials became the key to power, one entrepreneur demonstrated amazing skills by building his own corporate kingdom and making the world talk about it. This master of manipulation and intrigue opened the world to new business methods, becoming the man who stood behind the curtain of the great events of his time. The fate of this mysterious, influential figure is linked to oil, wealth, and unusual decisions, leaving us with lessons that are relevant to this day. John D. Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York, into an ordinary family. In his first 20 years, he experienced several important events and life stages. John was the second child of William Everett Rockefeller and Elizabeth Davis Rockefeller. The family was not wealthy, and John spent his childhood years in relative modesty. But the less interesting fact about John's father, about William, is an American entrepreneur, lumberjack, pharmacist, and fraudster who posed as a botanical doctor under the pseudonym William Livingston. He is known for buying and selling horses, and that he once bought a salt barge in Syracuse. Land speculation was another type of his business, and the sale of elixirs served him to maintain cash and helped in his exploration of land transactions. He lent money to farmers at 12%, but tried to lend to farmers who couldn't pay to buy back and take back farms. It turns out that John was not so poor with such a father. John D. Rockefeller's parents had 4 more children. Charles Nelson Rockefeller, John's older brother, who became a famous entrepreneur and banker. He was also active in philanthropy and owned stakes in oil companies. Andrew Carnegie. Rockefeller is the younger brother who was a scientist, philanthropist, and author. His name became widely known due to his works in the field of education and culture. Frances Lubin Rockefeller is John's sister, who married John D. Osgood. Her marriage also had an impact on Rockefeller's business connections and successes. John Davis Rockefeller is the younger brother who died at a young age, as the second son stood out for his entrepreneurial talent, which eventually made him one of the most influential people in the history of the United States. Rockefeller was the second child of 6 children in a family of loan sharks, landowners William Avery Rockefeller and Louise Davison. His father was of Anglo-German descent. His mother was of Scottish-Irish descent. According to the recollections of neighbors, John's father was considered a strange man who tried to avoid hard physical labor, although he had a good sense of humor. By nature, William was a risk-averse person, which helped him build up the small capital that allowed him to buy a plot of land for $3,100. However, the propensity for risk was combined with foresight, so part of the capital was invested in various enterprises. Louisa, John's mother, kept house for herself, was a very devout Baptist. Since her husband was away for a long time, she often had to save on everything. She tried not to pay attention to reports of her husband's oddities and adultery. Rockefeller recalled that from an early age, his father told him about the enterprises in which he participated, explained the principles of doing business. He wrote about his father. He often bargained with me and bought various services from me. He taught me how to buy and sell. When John was 7 years old, he began to feed turkeys for sale, earned a part-time job digging potatoes for neighbors. He recorded all the results of his commercial activities in his little book. From his first salary, Rockefeller acquired a good quality accounting book in which he recorded all income and expenses, paying attention to even the smallest things. He treated this book with special awe and respect, preserving it for the rest of his life. He invested all the money he earned in a porcelain piggy bank, and already at the age of 13, he lent $50 to a farmer friend at the rate of 7.5% per annum. His father's upbringing was continued by his mother, from whom he learned hard work and discipline. Since the family was large and William Rockefeller's businesses did not always end well, she often had to save money. At the age of 13, John went to school in the city of Richford. In his autobiography, he wrote that it was difficult for him to study and he had to study hard to complete the lessons. Rockefeller successfully graduated from high school and entered the College of the City of Cleveland, where they taught accounting and the basics of commerce, but soon came to the conclusion that 3-month accounting courses and a thirst for activity would bring much more than years of college, so he leaves it. From an early age, John showed entrepreneurial potential. In 1853, at the age of 14, he started his first job selling sweets and other goods in the area where he lived. Rockefeller attended secondary schools and, despite the lack of higher education, was actively engaged in self-education. He showed an interest in business and sought to develop his skills. In 1853, the Rockefeller family moved to Cleveland. Since John Rockefeller was one of the eldest children in the family, at the age of 16 he went to look for work. By that time, he already knew mathematics quite well and had completed a 3-month accounting course in Cleveland. After 6 weeks of searching, he was hired as an accountant's assistant at a small company, Hewitt & Tuttle, engaged in real estate and shipping, and soon he rose to the position of accountant. He was quickly able to establish himself as a competent professional, and as soon as the manager of Hewitt & Tuttle left his post, Rockefeller was immediately appointed in his place. At the same time, the salary was set at $600, while his predecessor received $2,000. Because of this, Rockefeller left the company, and this was his only job for hire in his biography. It was at this time that the English entrepreneur John Morris Clark was looking for a partner with a capital of $2,000 to create a joint business. At that time, Rockefeller had accumulated $800. He borrowed the missing amount from his father at 10% per annum, and on April 27, 1857, he became a junior partner of the Clark and Rochester Company. The company traded hay, grain, meat, and other goods. During these years, the southern states announced their secession from the Union, and the Civil War began. The federal authorities needed to supply a large army, and there was not enough startup capital of $4,000 to fulfill large-scale food supply orders. The company needed a loan. Despite the fact that the company was young, Rockefeller managed to make a positive impression on the director of the bank with his sincerity, and he agreed to provide the company with a loan. In 1859, at the age of 20, Rockefeller entered the business of trading and selling petroleum products. He founded his first company with partner Maurice B. Clark. Maurice B. Clark was one of the key figures in the formation of John D. Rockefeller's oil empire. Together with Rockefeller, he founded Clark and Rockefeller in 1863. This partnership became the starting point for their activities in the oil industry. Clark was an experienced oil refiner, which was a key aspect of their collaboration. His knowledge in this field was complemented by the financial genius and business acumen of Rockefeller. This partnership focused on oil production and refining. They developed strategies and technologies that later made Standard Oil one of the most successful and influential companies of its time. Under their leadership, the company grew rapidly, using innovative business methods such as horizontal and vertical integration. In 1865, they decided to split the partnership. Rockefeller continued to develop his oil interests, and Clark also remained in the industry, engaged in refining. It is important to note that Clark had an important influence on the early success of Rockefeller and Standard Oil Company, and their joint efforts played a key role in forming the foundation for the future oil magnate. At that time, the active development of the oil industry began. Rockefeller quickly realized the potential of this industry and, together with a partner, engaged in oil production and refining. Already in the early years of his career, Rockefeller stood out for his innovative business methods, actively introducing new technologies and management strategies. In these first 2 decades of his life, John Rockefeller laid the foundations for his future success by showing an entrepreneurial spirit, a commitment to learning, and a willingness to experiment in business. In 1864, Rockefeller married teacher Laura Celestine Spellman, whom he met while still a student. Being devout, she also had a practical mindset. Rockefeller noted, "Without her advice, I would have remained a poor man." In the late 1850s and early 1860s, kerosene lamps became widespread, and the demand for kerosene raw materials, oil, increased. At this time, Rockefeller met chemist Samuel Andrews, who was involved in oil refining and was convinced of the prospects of kerosene as a means for lighting. Rockefeller was also interested in a report about an oil field discovered by Edwin Drake in 1859. Common interests brought Andrews and Rockefeller together, and they founded a new oil processing company, Andrews and Clark, on a parity basis with Clark's company. The partners have established the Flats Oil Refinery in Cleveland. Oil and finished products were transported by rail. The Standard Oil Company was established in 1870. Rockefeller began to search for oil. Already at the beginning of his activity, he noticed that the entire oil business was organized inefficiently and chaotic, and focused on restoring order to work. First of all, the company's charter was created. In order to motivate employees, Rockefeller at first decided to give up wages, rewarding them with shares. He believed that this would make them work more actively, because they would consider themselves part of the company, since their final income would depend on the success of the business. The business began to generate income, and Rockefeller gradually began to buy up other oil companies, small enterprises that were not too expensive. Many Americans did not like this strategy. Rockefeller negotiated with railway companies to regulate transport prices, so Standard Oil received lower prices than its competitors. It paid 10 cents for transporting a barrel of oil, while competitors paid 35 cents, and with a difference of 25 cents from each barrel, Rockefeller's company also received income. Competitors could not resist him. Rockefeller put them before a choice: unification with him or ruin. Most of them chose to join Standard Oil in exchange for a share of shares. By 1880, thanks to numerous small and medium-sized mergers, Rockefeller had 95% of America's oil production in his hands. By becoming a monopolist, Standard Oil raised prices and became the largest company in the world at that time. In 1890, the Sherman Anti-Monopoly Act was passed, followed by demands to split Standard Oil. In 1911, Rockefeller was forced to split the business into 34 small companies and retained a controlling stake in all of them, and at the same time increased his capital. Almost all major American oil companies originated from Standard Oil, including ExxonMobil, Chevron. Standard Oil brought Rockefeller $3 million annually. He owned 16 railroad and 6 steel companies, 9 real estate firms, 6 shipping companies, 9 banks, and 3 orange groves. Rockefeller's name became a symbol of wealth. He lived in great comfort, but did not flaunt his wealth like other millionaires from New York's Fifth Avenue. He had a 700-acre villa and land on the outskirts of Cleveland, as well as houses in New York, Florida, and a private golf course in New Jersey. But most of all, he loved the Villa Pocantico Hills near New York. Rockefeller wanted to live to be 100, but did not live to be 3 years old. On May 23, 1937, he died of a heart attack at the age of 98. And you ask where all the money went? He considered himself a Christian businessman, and from childhood he transferred 10% of his income to the Baptist Church. In 1905, this share amounted to $100 million. Since 1897, Rockefeller has gradually transferred the management functions of Standard Oil to partners, and he is increasingly engaged in charity work. Thanks to him, the University of Chicago was founded in 1892, the Rockefeller Medical Institute, later Rockefeller University, in 1901, the General Educational Council a year later, and the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913. At the end of his life, Rockefeller gave away up to $500 million, and yet his only son, John Rockefeller Jr., inherited $460 million. He also spent about $500 million on charity, and in addition, gave money for the construction of the Rockefeller Center for the communications industry in New York. At the same time, he left $240 million to his 6 children. Rockefeller Jr. also built the famous Empire State Building. Being a devout man, Rockefeller donated part of his fortune to the church, especially to the needs of the Northern Baptist community, of which he was a member. The Rockefeller Plateau in the western part, discovered in 1934, is named after Rockefeller, who financed the American expedition under the command of Richard Bayard. The asteroid Rockefeller, discovered in 1918, is also named in honor of Rockefeller. As of the 2000s, John Rockefeller is considered the richest man in history. Forbes magazine estimated his fortune in terms of the equivalent of 2007 at $318 billion, while the largest fortune of that time, Bill Gates, amounted to about $50 billion. Important moments in the history of the collapse of Standard Oil. The U.S. Supreme Court has decided to split Standard Oil into 34 separate companies. These companies included such well-known brands as Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, Amoco, and others. The new companies created as a result of the split were independent, but they continued to deal with various aspects of the oil industry. Each of them retained a significant part of the market, which demonstrated that the separation did not lead to a real destruction of Standard Oil's dominance in the industry. After the separation of the Standard Oil companies, their leaders continued to develop into successful oil corporations. The separation also served as a starting point for legislative initiatives aimed at controlling monopolies and protecting competition. New independent companies continued their existence and developed in their fields of activity, becoming key participants in the global petroleum products market. Thus, the separation of Standard Oil Company was a significant moment in the history of the oil industry and became a precedent for antitrust measures in the United States. And so, we come to the end of our immersion in the history of John D. Rockefeller and his incomparable Standard Oil Company. This story is not only a narrative about the turbulent times of the oil industry, but also about the impact that one person could have on the world. We have seen how Rockefeller, combining his financial genius with business strategies, built an empire. And although the division of Standard Oil in 1911 put an end to this chapter, its influence continues to resound in history. I would like to mention one of his quotes. "Opportunities come so rarely in life that every moment of their passage must be used to the maximum." Today we saw how one person could change the course of the industrial era, creating not only a corporate empire but also shaping standards that affect the oil industry up to today. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you to new stories on our channel.